I'm Ken Perlin. I'm a professor in the Department of Computer Science at New York University in a laboratory called the Media Research Lab. I do research in computer graphics and animation and virtual and augmented reality and simulation and multimedia and games for learning. We have an entire Games for Learning Institute that I'm one of the directors of. And basically I work on the cool stuff. Our ability to use computer graphics for direct human-to-human communication is influenced strongly by the available technology we have to do it. And what's been happening year by year is that the ability to untether computer graphics from first the screen of a monitor and then now gradually even the screen of a smartphone is influencing the choices we make about where we see that graphics for human-to-human communication going. For example, 3 years ago, I would say the idea of doing augmented reality with smartphones was still fairly fresh and interesting to people. We're now moving, thanks to things like Google Glass and things like the Oculus Rift and these interventions, people are starting to think about a future time when there will be unobtrusive wearables that you won't even think of, like you didn't think about your glasses when you put them on this morning, and nobody probably remembers when they talk to you whether or not you were wearing them. And I think we're going to get to that era. And you could argue that when we get to that era, that's when computer graphics gets really interesting for communication between people. One of the big things that's happened just in the last year or two has been the rise of HTML5 and WebGL. Now, for the first time, any 14 or 15-year-old kid who has access to, who can put up a web page, can write software to give hardware-accelerated graphics to anybody, to everybody in the world. They can publish their amazing procedural graphics that someone can look at just with a web browser. To me, this is a game changer because there is no barrier to entry whatsoever for somebody broadcasting their graphics to the world. The reason this is important is that it means for the first time that young people can just enter with the kind of ease and facility that, for example, starting in 2008, YouTube allowed them to enter the field of making videos and publishing them. I'm giving 2 talks. The talk today is about games and learning. And I think what you're talking about is alluding more to the talk I'm giving tomorrow morning, where I'm talking about, tomorrow morning I'm talking about the future, well, the past, present, and future of interactive cinema. And I do think that these rapidly changing form factors, the fact that we will, for real, be able to just move our fingers in the air and everybody will see that floating in the air once we're all wearing the right devices, is going to change the way we think about interacting in an augmented way. I think that the most important thing is that, as we were saying before, it won't be technology. We'll just take it for granted. When we put on clothing, we don't think of it as technology. We're all just wearing clothing. We tend to forget that that's entirely technological. And I think the same thing is going to happen when there's just stuff floating in the air. It's not even going to be technology. It's just going to be reality. People have not biologically changed in any really significant way for 30,000 years. We are essentially the same as the Cro-Magnon. So in particular, our brains and our bodies are pretty much the same as they were long before what we call civilization. That being said, our adaptability and ability to survive as a species is highly contingent on the adaptability of these brains we have. So when thrown into new situations, our brains expand in their use. The people who are successful in any age, going back to the printing press, going back to the invention of the book about 2,000 years ago, the Codex, going back to just about anything, are those who, whether by design or by accident, stumble upon a way for people to communicate with each other that works well with our brain's adaptability. For example, just about 20, 21 years ago, the web started becoming really important when Tim Berners-Lee and his colleagues were making it easy for people to make hyperlinks, Mark Andreessen, image links. They couldn't have predicted Facebook. They couldn't have predicted Google. They couldn't have predicted which things would end up rising. Why did Google become the search engine of choice and not Yahoo, which at first seemed like a good competitor? So I think there's this tumbling thing that happens where a technology gets thrown out there, people start developing things for it, and it turns out that, oh, this is really good for the way people work. And then people push a little more, people adopt a little more, and we're all feeling our way because we don't know how a whole society of millions of brains and bodies are going to take to something or not. There is no easy way to predict the future. I don't think that market dominance comes from raw strength of large companies. I think that what large companies have is a very large pool of cash and the ability to mobilize on a large scale when they see something interesting. I think that many of the innovations that we associate with the large companies are the result of timely acquisitions of much, much smaller and therefore more agile companies which could try things that the large companies could never try. And then the large companies say, great, we can scale this up. Google Glass is not what it's going to be. Google Glass is a deliberately, I think, early intervention into a place that it was a little early to do it. And I think, yeah, on a fashion level, it's a little weird, it's a little geeky, it seems a little disturbing to people. That is that person filming me. There are a whole bunch of problematic issues around putting something like that into the ecosystem when it hasn't grown organically. That being said, there will come a time in not that many years when the social conventions around, is somebody filming me, is this public, is this private, all those things that no one has had a time to work out yet are going to get worked out. And after those things work out, and again, as we've said, after it's no longer technology, it's just part of your everyday life, a lot of the interesting aspects of people being able to have a wearable see-through display are then going to start coming up. The complementary user technologies, which cannot happen as long as it's, oh, look at me, I'm wearing my weird thing, will start happening when everyone is wearing it and it's not a weird thing. Then the Facebooks and the interesting social apps and the interesting geolocated games and all of these new things, the Yelps that actually exist in the world around you, are going to start working their way through. But it's not going to happen on today's Google Glass because it's just, it's putting a futuristic device into a place that isn't quite ready to accommodate it yet. But that's not surprising. One of the most exciting eventual outcomes from the sorts of things that I and my colleagues are working on is a number of years in the future, when little kids, 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, are just used to the fact that, say, 10 years from now or more, that they can just go like this and stuff appears in the air between them and other little kids, they will start to come up with uses for that we can't even dream of. Language itself will evolve to be something richer than it is now when we start combining these visual artifacts into our everyday communication with each other. There will be new grammars that nobody can even think of now because it's actually the little kids who'll come up with them. And that's a very exciting future. I think that the first few decades of computers on the Earth temporarily brought about a disconnect between human-to-human communication and the use of technology. A lot of our brains consists of experiencing through our senses. The physical presence of another person, subtleties of sound, of smell. There are a lot of parts of proprioception, where my hand is without having to look at it. A lot of our brains are currently not being used when we use computers. And I'm very excited by the fact that as technology catches up to us and we get away from screens, we're going to move back into a much more powerful place. Alan Kay, who I think famously said the best way to predict the future is to invent it, pointed out to me that 40 years ago, Nicholas Negroponte, the founder of the MIT Media Lab, observed that the computer isn't something you look at. The computer is the world around you. And I think we're getting closer and closer to the point with technology that's happening now when what he said is just going to be the world we live in.